right. Hello to those in the FTI community, whether you are clients or whether you've just been interested in our stuff that we put out. Yeah. So people like Kim, who's going to be heading up this webinar with me, provide really high-level knowledge. We do that on a free basis. We love what we do. We've been doing it since 2009. Specifically, this webinar will focus on the Master Functional Trainer, giving you information about the program, but also diving into how the Master Functional Trainer can really help coaches understand how to program better. So we're going to sort of philosophize somewhat. I'll show you a few of the slides to give you guys more of a visual of the system. And then Kim and I will just sort of bounce back and forward with how the Master Functional Trainer has benefited many of our students globally since 2009, and give you specific examples as well, case studies. Kim is a prime case study of someone who started off with one of our programs and now is blossomed into one of Australia's leading presenters. So without further ado, we'll get into it. Now, those of you who have tuned in live here, so welcome. For now, if you can stay muted, but pop questions into the chat. And at the very end, Kim and I will be able to, perhaps dive into some of those questions. So please add those in rather than interrupting the chat. So we'll definitely make time for any questions that you guys do have. So Kim, you've been with us for a number of years now. And from your perspective, if you can share the Master Functional Trainer, how it's helped you from both a student and as well as a trainer perspective. Of course, you're an educator now. So just getting some of your background would be great to share with the audience.
Sure. Well, I guess, there's so much. For me, the only reason that I am an educator is because I loved that program so much as a participant. So I guess that's probably a good spot to kind of start how I got here. But for me, I went into that program and it just completely, it changed my view of movement. It changed the way I move my own body. It changed the entire structure of my business, and just like my philosophies on exercise. So yeah, it really just completely flipped my world upside down when it came to movement and my business. So for me, it's been life-changing. And that's why I guess I got to the end of that and went, whoa, if I can help, any other PTs go from where I felt like I was before to where I feel like I am now, I want to do that and have an impact. So yeah, it's been mammoth. I don't even know where to start, I guess, on the specifics of what's changed, because I feel like everything did.
Yeah, terrific. And now as an educator, you've been teaching literally hundreds of students within Australia over the last sort of several years. What do you see sort of the shifts in the students' understanding of functional training in particular?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple of key areas. I think the first area is around injury and technique correction and limitations of clients. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest factors as well of, and since I did the course, then MRC came out after that, right? So, but for me, one of the biggest things was someone coming in and saying, oh, I've got a sore knee, and me not having to be like, okay, let's avoid lunges today. And let's get you into a physio. I'm not saying that there's no time when you should definitely, refer to allied health, but for the most part, people come in with those issues and we're able to correct them within 10 minutes. And I think that has a massive amount of power, not only for your client retention, and how impressive your clients think they are. They look at you and they're just like, whoa, how did she do that? Right? That's a really big retention tool, but also in empowering them to improve their own niggling tightnesses and pains and stuff. How amazing is that they can wake up with a sore knee one morning and know what to do to eliminate that without having to get external help. So I think for me, and for a lot of clients that come through, or coaches that come through the program, that's a really big factor of how to work with people who have injuries, which is most of general population have a niggling pain of some kind, right? And then the other thing I think is just variety in programming, because within Cert 3-4 qualifications, like to become a PT, it's so basic, and it's very, just foundation level. There's not enough room to explore the different ways that you can program in enough depth. So I think people that come in as beginners, or, they've just come through their Cert 3-4, walk out and kind of go, what do I do now? Like, how do I program a session? There's so much information that goes in through Cert 3-4 that they walk out the other side feeling a little bit flustered, and it's not systemized. So I think the fact that MFT is such a streamlined system in, this is how you use all these tools for all these movement patterns for the different outcomes. And this is all the different ways you can progress it. Not just by looking at increasing your weight or your reps, but how do we incorporate different planes of motion, and how do we change things up in different ways as well? So I think they're probably the two big things.
Yeah, and we'll focus a bit more on the programming element, but I think the big one is having a system, that we can take, a client through a journey and a sustainable one, right? So we're going to meet clients who are very elementary in terms of their training age, their journey, we call it, versus those who may be more experienced. And the idea, and you alluded to this earlier, is this system of regressions and progressions. And so do you want to just speak a little bit more about that? Because it's sort of a really important key here in terms of programming elements that we focus heavily on within the Master Functional Trainer program. Did you get that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the MFT is restructured. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? It's all good? Are we all good? Yeah. The MFT program, I guess, has changed quite a lot since I first did it and progressed quite a lot. For me, when we did it, it was looking at all of the different tools, like the different pieces of equipment and ways to, every movement pattern with every piece of equipment. It's changed a little bit now, more looking at the, developing strength and power and the specific outcomes you're looking for. So I guess there's multiple ways you can look at it. For me, I think within the system, I can look at, let's say, a functional bag and give you every movement variation. So all your movement patterns and every different way that you can complete that movement pattern with each piece of equipment. So, whether or not you're doing a sagittal plane deadlift, progressing it to a clean with the power bag, then you move into your transverse deadlift, your transverse clean. I think just the system in where to go from here when you're progressing or regressing a client, it's so simple and it just makes so much sense in my brain now. And I'd had 5 or 6 years as a PT before I did this system, and I just felt very stuck in like the same thing, like the same group of exercises, and it kind of explodes your brain with so many possibilities, I think, within this system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll go through and just have a little glance into that system. So we call it the way of FTI, and it's called the Adaptive Functional Training System. So this is the model that we teach, as Kim's been alluding to, rather than thinking about just simply the tool and being really, I suppose, really headstrong on that, because sometimes we get stuck, right? We favor a kettlebell or a functional bag, and that is okay. But the idea is that there's a plethora of different implements out there. The main thing to consider is Kim talks about the assessment early on. And the idea here is that even though this is fundamental, it's not fundamentally taught, in your Cert 3 or 4. So what we do is we break down a really fundamental assessment system that is a injury prevention tool within the Master Functional Trainer. So it's important that when clients sign up and you induct them, into your coaching practice, that there is a clear system of how to assess. What are you looking out for? And so we look at the 7 screens, movement screens, and from those potential dysfunctions, we then can offer some level of corrective. Now, in the Master Functional Trainer, we don't dive deep into that because that's covered in the Movement Restoration Coach, but it's certainly enough, as you've talked about, Kim, to really get a good grasp, get a good fundamental understanding of doing stuff, incorporating stuff before the main program, and then getting an idea, therefore, to then progress into this idea of how then can you create a program for this particular client. Or Kim, I'll get you to talk about this in a moment, even the groups, because you have a a broad business in that you don't just do one-on-ones, you do small groups. So we'll talk about that in a moment, because that does add another complexity to how you program, right? Maybe talk about that now. So whilst we're fresh on this idea, you've got the luxury of a one-on-one, right, where you can really be personalized. How do you incorporate the MFT from a programming perspective, say, for your small groups or your semi-private training?
I guess for us in my private training, the programming is as individualized and as complex as a one-on-one program is. So, and I know everyone's systems will operate a little bit differently around that, but for us, we're basically running 4 one-on-one sessions at the same time. There's no uniformity in the way it kind of all happens. So for us, it's used the same way in semi-private as it is with one-on-one. Within the group environment, though, I think it's been key, even just something as simple as before doing the MFT, I didn't know or didn't really consider the 7 primal movement patterns, for example. It was just like, oh yeah, there's some push exercises in there, there's some pull and there's some legs, cool. But there was never, rotation was not a thing I knew about or like incorporated into training, you know, and now it's my favorite way to move or thing to exercise, I guess. And gait and all of those, and getting so many different variations in within all of that. So I guess from a programming perspective, every time I write a session, whether it's a group class or a one-on-one, it would be incorporating all of those movement patterns in some way or another. But in terms of the group class, making sure for us, we have a very big variation on fitness levels and injury statuses, body shapes at my gym. So we might put, let's say, a kettlebell swing on the board as our hinge, like listed on the board. But within that, we have a lot of variations going on. So, you know, new people might be doing a kettlebell deadlift, and more advanced people might be doing a kettlebell, an alternating swing, or even a snatch within that system. And that's all just plucked out of how to progress these movements. So if you have it in your head, you have a baseline on the board, but it's really easy for me and for my other coaches that work with me who've all done the MFT to just like regress and progress things on the fly. It's just kind of, you know, it's really embedded in our brains at this point. So it makes it really easy.
Yeah, it's a great point. So this idea of movement continuums, guys, that we teach in the MFT, for example, the idea is that, as Kim is saying, you have, let's say, a hinge pattern that's loaded, you know, in this context here. And so you can go from a very basic hinge, if you will, even though that can be complex in itself, to some more dynamic variations. So you might have 5 or 6 potentially more iterations, but the main thing is everyone's on the same level. They're following a system, but at the same time, it's a fluid system. That's what you're saying, Kim. Yeah, it's not like everyone has to do this, even though some of the clients, you know, if they're not progressing and there's no degree of mastery, this is the thing, right, that I'll talk to you about here, Kim, is do you find that they get frustrated if some clients are stuck doing the same thing, right? And you talked about this routine, but actually not progressing through mastery. What can that do in terms of the potential damage to the client's connection with you as a coach?
Well, that's not really something that happens with us all that often, to be honest. Like, I think, yeah, it's not really a problem that we've had in recent times. But yeah, it definitely could be damaging. Like, even if you're looking at people doing an advanced movement and their goal is set quite high and it's a very challenging thing to achieve, you know, and I can say the same thing within my training. Damn, it gets frustrating. Like, you get to this point where you're like, nothing is happening. I've hit a plateau. I just want to give up. Like, you can get really frustrated with that process. So yeah, I guess it can be really damaging if that's what you're doing. So it's nice to have different variations at the same level that you could deviate to. So, you know, if, let's say, a kettlebell swing's just not coming together for someone, maybe they're not quite ready for it, change it across to a functional bag deadlift and a functional bag clean if that's something that's working well for them, and give them that feeling of mastery, so that then they're ready to go back and challenge and pick up the new skills that they were having difficulty with before. Yeah,
no, it's well said. And for those who are tuned in live here, and those who are going to be listening, just have a think around what is your frustration, if you like, a challenge, in and around how you program for your one-on-ones, maybe groups, larger groups, semi-private. Are you lacking a system, for example, around that? Are you lacking ideas? Just even if you're courageous enough, pop it in the chat, because that it's something that we've all gone through. I've gone through it before this system was created, and the importance of having not just linear progressions, but having this variety as well. I think it's really, really key here, what Kim alluded to in the hinge pattern. So it does allow for programming to be made a lot easier. But first, you need the foundation of actually rigid programming. And then after that, as Kim was saying, every one of the coaches, if you have a team, is on that same playing field. The worst thing you can have, and I had this previously with Primal Energy Fitness many years ago, you had some coaches who just weren't on the same level. So they were prescribing exercises and they were refuting what was part of the program. So really importantly here, folks, is to really be on the same page, to have a programming leader or champion. And then secondly, or just as importantly, is having the team being educated in that particular way. And that's what you've talked about, Kim, is uniform approach and having the team educated, but also giving them the freedom to work, within that particular model, being the MFT. So no doubt that that's helped you and your team be consistent, I imagine, in programming as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that can be really challenging if you are working with a team of coaches or you're looking to hire another coach to work with you, and I think it's the most important thing, is that your values of movement have to be aligned. And, you can't have somebody come in and contradict what you're saying. And there's such a big variety of ideas and concepts and methods in the fitness industry, right? Depending on what your values are and the way that you like to view movement. So I think it's really important to get some people that are going to align with your system, because if you don't, then there's no client trust that can be built. Because if one coach is saying something to your client and then you're saying another, there's enough misinformation out there on the internet as it is. Like, we don't need to add to confusion with face-to-face as well, right? So yeah, it's super important.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously some of you may be solopreneurs, you haven't got a team, you prefer to do it on your own, but there are others who are certainly maybe listening here and will be that have a team like Kim. So really important bit of advice, if you like, is to really think about that. Like, I've made the errors. Kim's talked about it in the past as well, and we learn from them in that, having a uniform approach, but also not just everyone has to conform. This is different. Like, conformity is different to uniformity, yeah? And so the idea here is to have a bit of a blueprint. And also, I imagine, Kim, you get together with the team and at least on a weekly basis, I imagine, just to sort of go through and troubleshoot to make sure everything is on track.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we have a team meeting every week. Obviously, we a couple of my coaches have got quite a large level of variety and experience within the team. So they might put in new exercises that we haven't seen before. So it'll be a weekly meeting where it's like, oh, by the way, I programmed this and it looks like this, and we'll go through it as a team and learn new stuff. So we're all on the same page in terms of what is the biggest priority, which for us is pain-free movement and correct technique. It goes above everything else, because if you don't have that, then you're not going to get too far from the way that we view it. But yeah, for sure, we meet up, we discuss ideas, and we expand each other's horizons in that way too.
Yeah, we all learn from another. That's great. So Janet's need a system to align with the whole team. Yes. And Kim talked about the values alignment, which is so important and often missed. So it's a great point, Kim, you make there. Rocket Rod says, I'm hating that I have to do boring programming and buy an EP that clearly doesn't have MFT. It is getting me to the point I am looking for somewhere else to apply my skills so I can utilize MFT. Okay, so you're obviously working within a setting, and it's a pretty rigid setting. That's a hard case, but it looks like you need to move on beyond that. And then Kit says, actually here to refresh my knowledge with the application of the system. Yeah, perfect. It's a great attitude. Kim, you did this, you did this course many years ago, I think 4 or 5 years ago. So really good growth mindset. Now, we'll work into the pillars here a bit more, Kim, so that we give them an idea of how the system evolves. So Writing a program is based on these 5 functional pillars. So pillar 1 is to restore function and movement. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Kim, and from your understanding and how you apply pillar 1 into clients' program?
Well, for us, obviously a lot of mobility work will come into this, mobility, and this is what I kind of consider the movement prep section in a lot of ways. So, this is where we'll look at any muscle imbalances going on or any issues that you found in that initial assessment. Do they have valgus knees when they're doing a lunge, or do they have niggling pain in their lower back? Anything like that pops up, that's then what we'll be looking to address within the restore movement, function and movement section. So, we're looking at muscle releasing where we need to, mobilizing through the joints, and then activating the muscles that have become inhibited through those imbalances. And then also looking at body weight, like restoring body weight movement patterns as well. So we'll do that using the suspension straps, and also just as body weight patterns too. Some banded work can come in here as well in some cases. So yeah, just really getting back to basics. So movement prep and restoring any funky kind of movement patterns that have been developed over time is what I would classify that section as.
Yeah, perfectly said. So it's another layer, guys. So from the initial assessment, we then go into it. Essentially, pillar 1 is another layer. And at times you might have clients who've had sort of injuries. Yeah, they've had a, maybe a sporting injury or an accident of sorts. So the idea is that it's not simply you get someone to pillar 1, 2, 3, and that's it. You may have to move them, back if you like, if they've had setbacks. So I think it's important to understand the system in this. It's very fluid and dynamic, and that's why it's sort of set out in this fashion. If I can move this mouse, now I just got to.
I think the other point on that as well, based off what Tarek just said too, is just because we might need to restore function in a shoulder doesn't mean that they're working within that restore function pillar for their entire body. Like we might be working on restoring shoulder function, but they might be, moving great in the lower body and really wanting to focus on more complex or the further along pillars in other areas. So this whole system is not just like everything we do is within pillar 1 and everything we do is within pillar 2. You can have elements of all of these pillars working together based off different areas of their body and different goals.
Yeah, absolutely. You rescued me there, Kim. I was stuck on that. So I've got pillar 2 now here, which is developing proper movement patterns. So if we look at it as a level of progressing from pillar 1 to 2, do you want to talk a little bit about this this idea of developing proper movement patterns into pillar 2 now?
Yeah, so we're using the body weight component of this again here as well. So using the suspension straps is a really big, and for me, I reckon suspension straps would have to be maybe the most commonly used piece of equipment in my gym. And like, I love kettlebells more than life, but the suspension straps are just so phenomenal for not only beginner, but also really advanced variations of movement too. So just looking at restoring, the way your shoulders should move when you're pulling or pushing. And yeah, that's kind of what we focus on there, is developing coordination, muscles to coordinate together in a good way.
Yeah, spot on. And this is another thing as well that we've actually added, and Kim talked about how the program has evolved, being the MFT, is that we do a lot of groundwork now and baseline positions. So there's this concept now of just fundamentally, can a client kind of get into a hinge pattern? Can they hold it? And then can they groove that pattern? Can they start to sort of move through it, right? Not just hinge, but actually groove the pattern. So it becomes another layer now, not just in the testing, but in the observation of refinement of technique. So we utilize that without load. So this is unloaded movement. And the straps, as Kim said, are just exceptional. Now, there's always this argument that rings can do everything. They can't. Like, rings are definitely great for doing gymnastics, but that aside, right, and I use rings as well, the straps are just amazing because they biomechanically really work in with these types of, let's call them regressions and even progressions, utilizing most of the primal patterns, right? Like you're not going to deadlift with them, or there's not going to really be any level of gait. So you've got 5 of the 7 primal patterns, the main ones anyway, are going to be really utilized here. So the idea, guys, is as well, from a groundwork perspective, we often miss the idea of the crawling to then walking. And so the idea here is if we really taper this back, the idea is to actually let babies crawl as much as possible, honestly. And, you know, the idea that, hey, you know, kids, babies then become toddlers really quickly and start to walk is really damaging to their coordination and their overall lower limb, upper limb, and also spine integration. So what we do is we'll go back and we'll do crawling patterns, use the straps, as Kim said. But again, it's not just focusing on it, although I would say that the suspension straps are a prime tool to help developing these proper patterns. So the idea is that body weight from this context becomes fundamentally interwoven into programming. And then, of course, we can then, off of that, become more complex, using Olympic rings, maybe doing, you know, if that's an option. Some people like doing handstands, right? We've got Tim as part of the faculty. He loves doing his handstands, right? That's a body weight, but that's a very advanced movement, right? But the point being there is that you need to start somewhere with a foundation. So that is our pillar 2. And so you guys can now appreciate the system, I hope. And so the idea here now is we're going to pillar 3. So do you want to talk more about the loading of clients' foundations?
Yeah, so I guess this is, well, foundation being the key word here. So just getting clients to move with load. So the goal being that they're moving consistently well in a body weight setting, in the developing proper movement patterns. Then they move on to moving well with load. So I guess you guys might have heard the saying, if you can't move it, don't load it. That kind of comes down to what we're looking at here. So once they're ready, they can then move into just really getting the basic movement patterns down under load. So we use the functional bags quite a lot in this area, and some kettlebells. There's no limit really on what equipment you can use within each of these pillars, as long as you're choosing the right exercise selection. But yeah, so just having a look at, you know, starting to load, like say like a hinge, so getting into deadlift, and yeah, looking all of your movement patterns using load, but at a beginner kind of level. You know, it's not super heavy. We're kind of going more for a 12 to 15-ish, maybe rep range, just to get people used to moving in that way and get the muscles conditioned and the neural system conditioned for that.
Yeah, and importantly, as Kim has said, it's not like you could use a medicine ball, for example. Anything that's light, really light loaded. It's not meant to be heavy or in terms of using complexity of movement patterns with it at the moment, right? So that's where Kim alluded to the movement progression continuum. Maybe that's just sort of, you know, sagittal plane hinging, for example, versus some slight rotation and then hinging, which we'll explore in the latter pillars. So then going to pillar 4, Kim, what is the building of strength and power in relation to the system about?
Yeah, building strength and power. So more dynamic variations, more. So I guess once we move into these areas, we're assuming clients have already developed a foundational strength. They have, you know, they've built a little bit of coordination. They understand what a movement should feel like. And they've done that kind of introduction block of training, should I say. So then we could move, for example, from a deadlift to a swing, something with more coordination and neural firing needed and more power needed to execute the movement. Yeah, and again, like you could use anything for this, but for us, we predominantly are looking at kettlebells in this section, and some more advanced functional bag movements as well throughout this.
Yeah, exactly. Just a note as well, as you're working through each of these pillars, you do get sort of certified in these different units, whether you're, you know, in Australia with AusActive or in Asia, Middle East, or even in America with American Council of Exercise. It does have the accreditation points in this program. And as well, if you're an EP listening, it's accredited with ESSA. So I think you get a generous 20 points for the MFT program. So it has the evidence-based components that we've done all of the research, at least what's current in regards to functional training, and have embedded it. So it's all referenced throughout, although it is very practical, right? But we wanted to make sure that it was accredited with the highest agency, being AusActive, as well as ESSA, Exercise Sports Science Association. Now let's move on to pillar 5 then, Kim. So do you want to talk a little bit more about the idea of integrating this complex functional movement patterns now?
Mm-hmm. So this is my favorite pillar. So in this, we're looking at obviously more complex patterns, right? So whether that means battle ropes, we spend a lot of time looking at more battle rope movement patterns and variations, obviously, because when you're using a battle rope, the force that it will throw back at you is pretty epic, right? Compared to, say, using a functional bag. So if you don't have the coordination and the baseline behind you, the battle rope's going to control you. You're not going to be controlling the battle rope, for instance. So also looking at things like flows and complexes, combining movement patterns together, really to get that, the more complex style of movement. So this is where the progressions by, changing up the planes of motion and all that stuff really comes into play here. And I think that's where the gold is for me personally. I think within this system is the limitless way that you can change and progress things is within this pillar. Yeah.
You've recently done a couple of series, on the complex movements. And again, we give this content freely, and we always have done and always will do. So Kim has provided some really, really high level stuff, as well as Tim, both exploring the MFT, the Master Functional Trainer, and the Movement Restoration Coach programs. So guys, the idea here is that oftentimes, as particularly beginners, 0 to 2 year trainers, right? It's easy to go straight into pillar 5, 4, and 5. And we think from our perspective as coaches, and I once thought this as well, is that clients are demanding this, right? So these perceptions, Kim, can sometimes run a dangerous thread, and so that's going to then lead to injuries because we're missing all of these foundational elements, particularly with assessment into pillar 1, which, as Kim alluded to, that can be your movement preparation, which 10 to 15 minutes would be advised, at least if you've got a 45-minute to an hour session, 10 to 15 minutes. And it's not a warm-up, not simply just a warm-up. There's so much that goes into this, including priming the movement patterns and the key movements in the main program. And so the idea, you guys, that you can appreciate this is taking the clients on a journey. You can regress this and focus on different elements within how you program. And that's the key, is you might just focus on, if you have an undulating program throughout the week, maybe it's pillar 1 and 2, that you're focusing on. You're not just going into these high geared 3, 4, and 5, where it becomes just simply a hit session. So it really dictates, would you say, Kim, if you wanted to talk about this more, how you program, let's say, a Monday through to Friday. If you've got a client who trains 3 times a week, you're not going to get them into gears 4 or 5, or simply just in pillars 4 to 5. So the idea is that, did you want to talk a little bit about maybe your experience of incorporating a weekly program that isn't just about loading or complexity?
Yeah, sure. So I guess and depends on people's training background. And I used to be like this too. It was all about smash, right? It was like, no, I'm here to work. I need to work hard all the time. That's how you get results. You just work really hard all the time, and and that used to be me, right? So doing this program and this system really broke my brain and broke it down and rebuilt it in a new way. And you'll get clients that come in like that too. So for us, there's the movement restoration work. That restore function and movement is at the beginning of every session. So like I said, we do your movement prep section. That section serves not only to prepare their body to move and be in the best posture it can be on that day and move the best way it can that day, but it also, those little 10 minutes that you do 3 times a week across the course of a month and a year add up to huge amounts of postural improvement training and body balance training, right? So people are like, oh, no, I don't have time to work on things like that. I'm too busy smashing my goals. But if you can sneak it in at the start of every session, those little, every time you do that 5 minutes, it really adds up, and you can get some phenomenal mobility and postural changes over time. So for us, that becomes at least the first, I want to say 10 minutes, depending on how restricted and in a less nice way I would never use to clients, but how 30 minutes of that movement restoration focus before they would move on to any of the pillar 2 or pillar 3. Whereas other people might have, let's say, a more advanced person who comes in for us that trains 3 times a week, they'd always have that restore function and movement prep at the beginning, but they might have 2 days that are, you know, more complex in pillar 4 and 5, and then another day that peels back a little bit. It's got a little bit more of a mobility focus and just a foundation focus. So we really do intertwine all of this to work all together at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, there's no being stuck in one pillar and having to master everything before you could move on, because that's just not reality, I guess, for many people.
No, very well said. Fluid and dynamic, but yet still allowing for a micro improvements, which is what you alluded to. And for those who are, again, who are here live and are to listen in or watch in, just have a think about, you know, how are you at the moment, you know, programming, particularly on a weekly basis? Are you planning? Are you structuring? Is it simply session by session where you sort of get a feel for it? So the idea here is that, yes, sometimes we just get a feel for it and a sense for it, because the client may come in just ultra stressed. You've written a great program. You're going to need to adapt that, right? But I think having the planning and structuring and keeping that somewhat flexible is really important, wouldn't you say, Kim? Is better to have something structured, so you have like a template, and it's really important that you do have that structure, but you do allow for the client who may have had a slip or may have just been really stressed from a stressful life situation. Are you going to hit them up with a hard session, for example? So Kim, do you want to just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think sometimes as PTs, we're like, no, this is the plan. This is what we're doing today, right? I've written this program, like we're on a 5-week strength cycle. You have to be hitting this weight today. And it's really hard to stick to plans like that because life happens for so many people, you know. I think Tarek's exactly right. If someone's been really stressed, man, you'll see that straight away. And even we use MyZone within our system, within our gym, and you'll see the heart rate changes and what's going on with people when they're in that state. And sometimes people can just walk in the door and that's really all they can manage, right? They've made it in, they walk in and they're just like, oh. And you really have to read those people, because if you're ignoring where their fatigue and their energy levels are at, then, you know, the fact that they've walked in the door and want to be there on that day is a pretty great credit to you in itself, you know. So you've got to listen and adapt to what they need on that day.
Yeah.
And then other times people come in and they're like, you know, some people respond to stress with like, hit me, I want to train harder, like whether or not it's a way to process the stress or maybe just procrastinate it and distract it for a while. Some people will respond in a different way. So yeah, you've definitely got to have fluidity within the way that you program. And you know, I always think you need to value how the client feels over your program any day of the week. Yeah,
totally. And this is where the leading and coaching comes into it, folks. So we talked about the movement system, assessing the 5 pillars, programming, but the other pillar to the MFT is the coaching. And so if we work within this system now, you'll see in the middle here, there's this ongoing assessing and coaching. So what does this mean really? How I summarize it is you as the coach being ultra present. So, you know, let's just take being mindful, being present, present moment awareness about connecting with that client or clients as they walk in the door, reading them. All of these things are going to be gauged only if you're present and focused as a coach. If you're not and your mind's sort of wandering, you're not going to pick up these cues, you know, or these clues into potential damage that your programming may be doing to that person, right? Fluctuating heart rates, you think about the added malaise that can add. So really being in a present state with them, but also being present within the session. And the sessions are dynamic, right? Like, you know, people are in motion, right? They're swinging bells, they're picking up bags, they're pressing stuff over their head, you know, they're crawling around. So really, the idea of the MFT is to really teach the coach to harness this power of how to communicate to clients, how to cue, how to, you know, by communicating with them, you're creating this bond, right, with every one of your clients. And so this to me, and this is one of my favorite areas within the system. And I've written a program called Coach with Purpose, because coaching and communication is an important attribute for all coaches. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, how you maybe incorporate it, and just some of the insights to those listening in, Kim?
Yeah, well, I guess something I wrote in one of the Wednesday wisdom posts I did a while ago, just in terms of, you know, communication and coaching, is you can be the most book smart PT going around. You can have done all of the certifications in the world and know every bony landmark in the body. But if you can't communicate in a way that your clients understand what you're trying to say, and that they get excited about what you're trying to say, all of that information is completely useless, you know, because at the end of the day, if you can't communicate with them what you're trying to do and get them excited about it and understanding it, then there's no point. You know, even trying to get that information to them. So communication is 100% the most important part of being a PT and coaching, I think. But for us, yeah, like there's an ongoing joke around my gym that I'm really bad at counting reps. And I think almost that's maybe like a qualification to be a PT. You have to be really bad at counting or timing things. Like I mess it up all the time. But it's always like, well, would you rather I counted your reps or focused on your movement? I'm blonde. I can't do two things at once, right? So it's either I count how many lunges you did, or I have a look at your knee alignment, your hip alignment, and what's going on with your feet as you lunge. Like you just can't have everything, right? So, and I think, yeah, there should never be a time really when you're coaching that you're bored, because there's always something to look at. People will move differently every time they come in and see you, based on what their life is, what life's throwing at them at that point. Have they been sitting around all day? Have they been running around all day? Have they been carrying like a toddler on their hip all day? Everything is going to have an impact on the way that they move. And it's really important that we pay attention to just how fluid and malleable the body is.
Yeah, and I think at an energetic level, guys, you know, this is just real. Like, there's an energy transference, and if you're there fully present, and I've known this right throughout the years, if I wasn't on my game, like clients will pick that up, right? And some of them will tell you up front, and others may not. But the idea there is, if you're fully present, like you're building this connection, you're building more levels of trust in that bank account, right? That trust bank account. Just as Kim alluded to, that great analogy, or the sense that if you're doing 5 to 10 minutes of restoration, and then at the end of your session, you're doing 5 minutes of recovery, that adds up into their movement bank account. And honestly, think about that over weeks, over years, it is a worthwhile investment. And likewise with your coaching and your connection building with your clients, it's a worthwhile investment. So that's why within the MFT, we've got here the ongoing assessing without paralyzing the client, like stopping them every moment and going, hey, you know, make sure you're tracking better. Like it's about letting them to self-organize as well. Yeah. So the idea is that we lead them on a journey to actually self-regulate somewhat, right? And self-organize themselves within a session, right? Or outside of your session. So I think this is a really important point, is that you as a coach, you need to sometimes just back off a little bit. Yeah. Just let them move. But you've done all of the hard work. There's no point trying to paralyze them, Kim. So, you know, from your experience as well, how have you adapted and adopted that in your coaching practice, particularly the fact that you've got multiple coaches and you're mentoring now, to sort of adopt that mentality, if you like, you know, not to stop the client all the time?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what's going on, right? There are some cases where you would be like, whoa, let's stop right now. Like, let's say there's a lot of, you know, really poor spinal position going on and they're about to pick up a heavy deadlift weight. Like, it'd just be like, whoop, let's not. But yeah, when people are learning and figuring things out, I think if you can get efficient with your cueing, you kind of need to let people figure it out for themselves as well, right? So if you say something about, keeping your knee in line with your third toe when you lunge, if they're like looking a little bit confused and they do a couple and it doesn't look great, but then over time they're like, oh, I get it. Like they need time to understand and align their body. And yeah, for sure, I think it's important to give people space to do that. And yeah, that all the coaches are working on the same level with that too. So there's definitely parts or, certain things that I'd be like, that's an immediate, let's stop and, make an adjustment. And then there'll be other parts of after that set, I'll talk to them about changing and trying this.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really well said. So this is the system, guys, and some of the insights that Kim and I have laid into it. And so the main thing is that we cover the programming modules as well. We cover these individual modules too, because we want to make sure that you have the science and the foundation of each, i.e. programming, mindset coaching, the functional anatomy, the client screening. So these are our foundational sort of theoretical modules, even though they're applied theory. And then we move into the 5 pillars, showcasing it, utilizing these tools, which you're all going to be certified in as well. As the coach goes through them. And so just a little bit more on the system. We teach it in Australia, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney. We do have 3-day immersions. Kim recently ran one, I believe, a couple of weeks back in Melbourne. And we are on the 12th of October, 2022, just in case down the track you're listening, go, what? And then we do have these live sessions, which are virtual. So we do have intakes. And so there's another layer here is that in the live sessions, Kim or one of our other instructors will go through these in detail, and they're all recorded. And we do have a self-paced version as well for those in, sort of the Northern Hemisphere or can't make those live sessions. And then we have an assessment pathway. So we want to make sure that the standard of an MFT is really high. So we have these 3 particular case studies that we believe ticks the boxes for these pillars, and one of them being design and deliver a functional programming block. And that's done through our GoX Pro app. So we use a bit of technology that we've leaned into with another company to actually add tech along the journey of a coach. Coaching mastery video submission, we have a template that you follow, how to break down and coach, and you're going to be assessed on that, a real-time assessment, and then the movement mastery video submission. So making sure that, you've got your hands on the tools, you're training yourself, moving yourself, and you're honest with yourself and your clients as well. And so just a few things here. You're going to learn how to perform, coach, and program these functional training methods. And some of the things here that you want to stand out with unique skill set that is based on a proven system that is going to offer to your clients from specialized one-on-one training, semi-private, or team-based training. And then become super competent in how to perform and communicate to a diverse range of clients. We discussed this throughout the webinar. Community and sports massive to us. Kim and Tim, Glenn, and others in our faculty deliver high-level content within our FTI tribe. That's for those in the MFT or MRC program. But there's also a free group called the Functional Fitness Concepts. So Kim delivers a live every week. There's just gold in that, yeah. And Kim has a series of essential components of the MFT that Kim delivers, and then does a live on them. So there's lots of really good free content there. We love community and love supporting coaches out there, whether they're in our programs or on the fence for some reason that they're not yet over the line. And then finally, we have 2 tech solutions, the GoX Pro app and also our new Matrix learning management system. So, we put a lot of effort into evolving our systems over the years, and we believe that technology doesn't replace a coach, but it can augment the coach's journey. So, Kim, do you want to talk a little bit more about how this has sort of helped you to kind of better understand? You referred to, and this is not the be-all, end-all for tech solutions. You talked about heart rate monitors and things like that. From your experience, do you want to talk, just touch on this and the importance of this for the coach?
Is in the importance of integrating technology or?
Exactly.
Yeah. So for us, I guess MyZone has been a pretty big game changer for us in terms of using tech, and the members get all excited about it because they get points for their workouts, and, you know, they love getting to the red zone. They're so excited about it for the most part. But for us, we're looking at it on such a deeper level. We're looking at how long their heart rate's taking to come back down. Is it sitting at a more elevated level or a lower level compared to what it would normally be? Like, are we getting fitter, or are they under stress? Are they getting sick? We use all of that kind of information to gauge how hard or how mean we're being. You know, like in a group class, if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, okay, everyone's still in the yellow, let's give them an extra minute rest. So for us, that kind of stuff has been, you know, really helpful on a coaching level and really motivating on a client level as well, and helping with accountability and compliance with their exercise, if they're doing stuff outside the gym. Yeah, I think for us, that's probably the main thing that we use. Using the assessment screening kind of software with GoX Pro can be really helpful at getting an in-depth breakdown on where someone's posture and body is sitting, which can help in that initial assessment stage, and then knowing what we need to do with a client moving forward to restore that function and movement. Yeah, they're probably the two main things that we use, I would say.
Brilliant. And some of you may be using stuff already, maybe you're not, but just consider the idea of like GoX Pro, you can run your business on it. You can, you know, do the programming rather than, you know, not programming or writing on sheets. The GoX Pro can offer all of that, for example. And there's plenty of other certainly systems out there. But the idea is that we use this to kind of excel the student's journey. And obviously having videos and manuals and all that content stored in our learning management system, you know, really allows for more optimization of learning. Yeah, because even in the live events, sometimes we forget things. So overall, our intakes are 4 months long. If you start, you know, if you do a live, otherwise, you know, there are self-paced options. But look, we're not here to sort of just drive in that you need to do MFT. It's more of an informative, some insights as to how we do it, so that those of you who don't know much about FTI or the Master Functional Trainer, hopefully can actually appreciate you know, the power of it. So if you're wanting to join our, as I said, the Functional Fitness Concepts group, and if you, once you're in there, if you just tag in free resources, what we'll do is we'll give you some extra videos, a free book as well, a few other resources for absolutely free, if you guys do want that. So that's all that they're on offer. And we'll have one of our team members provide you with all of those resources. Aside from that, I hope those who have tuned in, I mean, none of you left, so I'm glad that we engaged you. Back to you listened in. Hopefully you've got some insights. Even those of you who have already done the MFT, you know, you're crying out for refresher. We can certainly offer that as well. But the idea, guys, is to really appreciate the system, and to kind of add in this idea of the 5 pillars that feeds into a client journey. And that's that whatever level that client is at, whatever system you've got running, whether it's just one-on-ones or if it's semi-private or team training, you know, group training, the Master Functional Trainer can certainly cater for all of those different dynamics, outdoor trainer, indoor trainer. It's very minimalistic, if you like, with regards to equipment, really. And you can really take that anywhere. You don't have to have a big commercial space. But you know, there are those like myself many years ago who are outdoor trainers as well, and you need to be more creative when it comes to programming. Kim, any final thoughts or words from you to the listeners?
No, I think I've already talked enough.
Yeah.
Couldn't shut me up.
All right, that's good. Well, thanks again, Kim. And for those who have tuned in, we'll have a recording of this available. And again, if those of you who want the free resources, please go to Functional Fitness Concepts. That's exactly what it is. You type that in, and then I'll have one of my team members add you and provide you with those resources, and we'll take it from there. So that's the Master Functional Trainer program, a bit of an insight into it. And yeah, hopefully you guys can stay tuned for more webinars. We do lots and lots of webinars, specialized ones, information ones. So stay tuned for the next one. So thanks again, Kim.
No worries. Thank you.